Alright, so we just finished up getting our actual frame and the product here, so let's go ahead and keep fixing this up and then get everything in position and add the actual slide that will come out from underneath it. The first thing I think we should clean up is the border here on our frame. The far right and the left borders are actually being cut off. See how it just ends with the white space here after the React logos? There should actually be, just like this inner box and the inner green border, there should be a border on the outside of that too. So if we come in to featuredproducts.js and scroll down to our frame style, let's go ahead and give it a box sizing property, and this will be the value border dash box. And basically what this is saying is that we want the border to be taken into account for the height and the width, whereas previously it was being cut off. So then to get the border to actually appear, let's go ahead and we need to change the height here to just a little underneath the width so that it will resize this correctly and show both of these sides. I'm not 100% sure why this SVG is having some issues with this, but if we go ahead and change this to 24.85, so just right underneath what the width is, then that'll make the height just smaller, and so the width and the border should appear. So if we go ahead and save that and flip on over, we see that that is the case, and now we've got the border. Now you may have noticed that we actually have two of these still being cut off because this section is not tall enough. So let's go ahead and where we set the height of 120 rem for our background, let's change that to 180. So this will be a pretty large section, but if we save that, we'll see that now we've got plenty of space for all of our items, and then we can also add some spacing in between the items. Before we do that though, let's actually go ahead and align the items in the pattern, the staggered pattern that we'd seen in the design file. So this one should be over here, the second one should be in the middle, and the third one should be all the way to the right. So if we go ahead, let's scroll down in here, and instead of just immediately returning the grid item that's containing our product and frame here, let's go ahead and select from this parenthesis down to this inner parenthesis here, and let's go ahead and wrap this with braces, and then we'll need to come up and let's create a new line after this parenthesis, add the return statement, and now we can add some logic up here for each of the featured product frames. So what we want to do is we can create a constant of alignment, and this will go ahead and determine whether or not we should be in the beginning, center, or end of the container. So I'll just go ahead, since we only have the 6 items here, we can just go ahead and define these rules. So if I is equal to 0, so if we're on the first index, or because this will repeat, if I is equal to the third index, which would be the 4th item, then we'll go ahead, and if that's true, we'll set the alignment to flex start, and that will make it appear at the beginning. If that's not true, let's check if I is equal to 1, or if I is equal to 4, and if that's the case, we'll go ahead and center them up. Otherwise, let's go ahead and set it to flex end. So let's go ahead, and then we need to actually use that alignment. So here on our grid container that's wrapping the item for our icon button, and then the grid container down below, let's go ahead and on this container, so this is controlling where the frame is actually appearing from left to right. Let's go ahead and use the justify prop, since this is a container of direction row. So to align it horizontally, we'll use the justify prop, and we'll pass in the alignment that we determined from up above. Let's go ahead and save that. If we flip on over to the browser, check that out. We now have the alignment that we had seen in the design file. Now it looks like this center frame, actually, that left border is just a little thin. So let's go ahead and change from 24.85 to just 24.8. If we go ahead and save that, that'll make that a little more proportional and even. I'm not sure why that this SVG is having such problems with this. I think the thin border is just causing some weirdness at the edge. So now that we've got the horizontal alignment where it needs to be, let's go ahead and you see how we've got all this extra space here at the bottom. That's because all of these items are currently being aligned to the top of the background container. So let's go ahead and make sure that that's centered up with an even amount of space on the bottom and on the top. So if we open up the code editor, just like we used the justify prop here to align the items themselves horizontally, we need to actually go up to the wrapping grid container and use this to align the items within it. So to align all of these. So since this is a direction of column and we want to align them in the center vertically, that's going to be the main axis of the direction column. So we can use the justify prop here. Set that to center, go ahead and save, flip on back, and we see that they did move down and we now have an equal amount of space on the bottom and on the top. I don't really want these frames to be pushed all the way to the left and the right edges though. I think there should be a little bit of space there. So since we already have the classes of background, let's go up and give our background class a padding, and we'll use a shorthand to give it 2.5 rem of padding on the left and right and 0 padding on the top and bottom. Actually, I think that's reversed. I think it needs to be 0 and then 2.5 rem. So if we save that, now we can see that we've got a little bit of space on either side. Now, another cool effect that I think we could use here is to go ahead and make these appear as if they're actually hovering above the background. So we can give them a shadow for some elevation. So on our frame class, let's also give them a border shadow or a box shadow of theme.shadows, and then we'll do 5. So let's save that, flip on over, and now we've got a really cool looking hover effect on all of our frames. So I think that now we can go ahead and actually start adding the slide and the functionality to make it appear from out underneath. So let's go back to the code, and we had previously commented out this grid container direction column next to the icon button, and this is going to represent our actual slide. So I'll go ahead and uncomment this out. And we won't add anything in here yet. Let's just get all these styles working. So we'll go ahead and give it a classes prop, the root class for the grid of classes.slide. Then we can come up, create our slide class in the style object, and let's give it the background color of our theme.palette.primary.main. And then let's give it a height of 20 rem, so it won't be quite as tall as the frame, and then a width of 24.5 rem, so it won't be quite as wide as the frame either, which will allow it to hide behind the frame. So let's go ahead and save that. If we flip on over, we see that it is going to mess things up just a little bit until we adjust it, because now we have the slide appearing directly underneath our frame. So now to actually get the frame to sit on top of the slide, we're going to have to mess with things just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and open up the code editor, and we're going to give our frame the property position absolute. And that's going to tell the frame to essentially ignore any other items as if they're not even there. And so that will allow the slide to just pass right behind the frame as if it didn't even exist. So let's go ahead and save that and flip on over. And you can see that now we have our frame actually being hidden, or the slide being hidden rather. Now, this also messed up our alignment a little bit, because as you can see, this frame is now sitting a little bit in what looks to be the row of the other frame, and that is because they're actually ignoring the other frame spacing because of the position absolute. So this is actually just going off of the height of the slide underneath the frame. So to fix this, let's just add some margin to the entire container here for each row, and then space them out a little bit. So go ahead and let's come down, and on the item container that is wrapping our entire row here, our entire piece of this slide, let's go ahead and give this a classes prop of the root class for the grid, and we'll give it classes.product container. And then we can come up, create our product container class. We'll just go ahead and give it a margin of 5 rem on the top and bottom and 0 rem on the left and right. So let's go ahead and save that, and that'll go ahead and space out all of our items. And you notice that it actually messed up our space distribution here to where now this last frame is being pushed all the way against the bottom of the footer, and the top frame still has a bit of spacing. All right, so introducing the position of absolute kind of screws with things a little bit. So it just means we have to pay close attention to what we're actually trying to do. So if we open up the code editor, if we take a look here, it's actually this grid item inside of here that is causing the issue. So if we're going to go ahead and remove this, I'll explain why this works in just a second. Let's go ahead and remove that extra grid item so we just have the icon button and the grid container for the slide inside of here. And now let's go up onto this grid container and add align items of center. All right, let's go ahead and save that and flip back on over. And now we can see that we've got some space underneath here and the same space up above. So essentially what was going on here, we can see if we go ahead and remove this align items that we just added, go ahead and save that. We see that it shifts it down a little bit and it goes ahead and that's back at the bottom where it was, and we have the unequal space at the top. So if we go ahead and put that back, essentially what was going on is that extra grid item inside of here was making it so that these styles weren't being applied, or the align items and justify controls weren't being applied directly to these items. They were being applied to that singular grid item. And essentially because we added the position of absolute onto the icon button, it just threw off the styling because this was ignoring everything else. And so these controls didn't have any effect on it. So by getting rid of that extra grid item, that allows us to put these controls directly on these items themselves, and that got them where they needed to be. This then allows us to center these up within the row itself, and that distributed the space how we would expect it to. So before, when we just had that grid item and we didn't have the position of absolute on this, then that grid item knew that it was taking up as much space as the icon button, and so things worked as we expected. However, once we added the position of absolute, then that grid item wasn't taking up the correct amount of space anymore because the position of absolute made it ignore the icon button. So by getting rid of it, that enables us to control these items directly. I know this is a little confusing, it's probably not perfectly clear, but this is a pretty complex example, so it's something that you'll get a lot more familiar with in your own projects as you just keep working with the grid system and seeing all of its nuances. The position of absolute really messes with stuff though, so that's something that you'll just have to really keep in mind whenever you work on your own projects.